We are now live on YouTube, and at 7:33, I'm going to call this regular meeting of the Reading Board of Education to order for Tuesday, January 5th, 2021, being held remotely pursuant to the governor's executive orders. And as we start, I would first just like to wish everybody, the board, the administration, the members of the public here, a very happy new year. Welcome to 2021. We made it. And as we enter into the sort of unofficial start of municipal budget season, I also just want to acknowledge the hard work of my colleagues on the board over the past 9 months that we've been in this crisis learning posture. I think we've had 25 or 30 meetings like this sitting remotely, many hours of deliberation on very difficult questions and very difficult topics that I don't think any of us expected to be facing when we entered these positions. And I want to thank them for their collegiality and thoughtful discussions over the course of this crisis over the past 9 months, and look forward to continuing that collaborative tone going forward as we enter a budget season that is in all likelihood going to be an extension of more Zoom meetings into the wee hours of the night. In addition, just want to thank the members of the school community for their continued patience and flexibility with respect to the manner in which we've had to engage in teaching and learning in many different models over the course of this academic year, even getting back to last March. And also thank the administration for their hard work in balancing the needs of our staff, our students, our families, and our community. So with that, I would move to the second item on the agenda, which is the approval of minutes from the December 1st, 2020 meeting of the board.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, John. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Stephanie, thank you. Is there any discussion on the minutes from December 1st of 2020? Hearing none, if there is no objection to the minutes, they will be deemed approved by unanimous consent, which brings us on to agenda item number 3, which is public comment. Any members of the public wishing to make a comment, please indicate so by raising your hand in the participant window or otherwise making yourself known. I see Vanessa Visner. Vanessa.
Good evening, Board of Education. Thank you for this meeting this evening. I would like to advocate for a return to either hybrid or fully in-person instruction. As of January 11th, our students have been out of school proactively since before Thanksgiving, which was not done in any other day school, and was against the Commissioner of Education's recommendations to proactively close schools. At this time, the people who are suffering most are our students, and they need to be in school. They need connection. They are suffering socially and emotionally, and they need to be back in school. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Any other public comment? Is Danny Garvidio, you're trying to raise your hand? I see a thumb up.
I am. I can't get my hand raised to work. I apologize. Next best thing was the thumb. So I don't think I've been the squeaky wheel in Reading. By the way, Danny Garavito from Reading. Thank you. Sorry.
Your street, Danny?
Ledgewood, 51 Ledgewood, if y'all want to come over. I don't think I've been the squeaky wheel. Chris, I know you and I have gone back and forth on social media and stuff like that. All I'm asking for, my comment is just asking for more transparency when it comes to why we're out. If we choose to stay out, or if we come all in, what's making us come all in or go hybrid, that type of stuff. I think a lot of us as parents and I completely agree with what Vanessa just said, is that, my kids, Jesus Christmas, they need to come back. I'm blessed that one is coming back for 2.5 hours, almost every single day now. Thank you. But I wanted a little bit more transparency as to why we're one way or the other, and not just whatever like a positivity, rate is. Is it because of staffing? Is it because of, kids being sick in the school? But just a little bit more information so that I feel better about it and not felt like a prisoner in my own home with my 2 children for no reason. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. I see Logan Nelson, but I'm wondering if it's one of Logan's parents.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's Laura Nelson here in Reading. And Mr. Harrison, I did send you an email last weekend in expressing my concerns. And along
I'm
with
sorry,
Vanessa.
Laura, to cut you off. Is that
Oh, yeah.
your street, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. 3 Deer Hill Road.
That's okay. Thank you.
And I just wanted to echo these ladies' 2 comments because, for me, working in a pharmaceutical industry, we base a lot of our decisions on science. And I think that it's really hard for me to understand the science behind the closing of the schools when one district 2 miles down the road is open, or Weston is open, or Greenwich is making it work. How I propose some solutions on how I believe we could try to make it work like the other school systems and how they're in school full time. And I don't get any response back. And again, the transparency is so important because I think as parents here of Reading, there's some of us that are struggling and having to have our spouses now leave their job in order to financially, instead of me hiring somebody $200 a day, now we're up against this. Okay, do we have my husband leave his job? Are we going back to school? And again, I understand we're up against a wall here, but it's got to come to an end. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, Sarah Odell.
Hi, Sarah Odell from Black Rock Turnpike. I just wanted to say that as somebody whose kids are like deeply struggling with distance learning, I really empathize with what all the parents here are going through because my kids are really, I have a kindergartner. And if you've never sat down with a kindergartner to a lecture environment classroom to learn to read, woo, that's a time. That's a time. It's a lot of screaming. It's a lot of laying on the floor and crying. It is missocialization. And so like when I'm telling you that I get what you're saying, like I lock myself in the bathroom and cry a lot during school, like embarrassing to admit, but I think worth saying, that we're all in this same boat. But I also just wanted to say that from the perspective also of somebody whose husband almost died this spring, possibly from COVID, but we still don't know, and we probably never will, and who has vulnerable family. I just wanted to also thank the school and Dr. Harrison for these really hard decisions. There are certainly no good choices. Opening the schools means that people will get COVID in the same way that opening a restaurant means that people will get COVID. And I get that this is also, it's a decision. We were in a position as a country where we didn't make some of the choices that we wish we would have made a long time ago. So I really empathize with where everyone's coming from. And I just want to thank Dr. Harrison also for trying to keep our school community as healthy as he can as well. So just a thought on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other public comments? I don't see any other hands in the participants window. I'm scrolling the tiles, see if anybody's waving. Angela Caius.
Hi, everyone. Not in any position to put a video on, so I apologize. You're just going to have to look at the picture right now. Angela Caius, 41 Deer Hill Road in Reading. I was hoping at some point today, one of the board or perhaps Dr. Harrison might enlighten us on any insider information on vaccination. I know that certainly teachers and staff members are essential workers, so it would be fantastic if you had a sense of what the current timeline might be for vaccination for our teams, if there is a timeline, and if there's anything that as parents we can do certainly to lend a voice that everyone in the school is deemed ultimately essential, or anything else we can do to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Carolyn, I assume Baker.
Yes. Hey, sorry, I'm in a similar position to Angela with multiple meetings happening in my house right now. But Just want to thank the board for all of their work through all of this. And I know you guys are going into a really tough season. I just wanted to, as we kick off budget season, be a voice of advocacy for trying to do our best not to cut those programs that we currently have that maybe don't serve every student, but are very important, things like our gifted programs, our music and our arts. So I hope that as we go into this season, we can be really mindful that some of these really special programs have gotten a lot of our kids through this pandemic. And you know, just thank you guys for being mindful of that on the front end.
Thank you, Carolyn. Last call for public comment. Seeing none.
I'm sorry.
Board member comment.
Oh, shoot.
Chris, I have a couple things.
Sure, go ahead.
Two things. Thanks for the public comments. I appreciate speaking up at the meeting. I know that's not always easy to do. I also would like to advocate for a return to school in any possible fashion that we can come up with as soon as we can. As a board member, this is very tough for me. I am not fully on board not being in school. I feel like we're not looking after the well-being of our students. And, you know, I thought even early on, and I made statements saying that, you know, the best of the students are doing fine. And you know, those that struggle, like our special ed students, are probably having a really hard time. And I said that to a friend the other day who promptly called me out that her A student is having a tough time, is losing motivation, and you know, is really wanting to get back to school. And I think that's true of a lot of kids. You know, even my daughter, who's off at college, she's, you know, when she's there, she's 1,000 miles away in Nashville, but sitting in her dorm for some of her classrooms or for some of her classes. And it's just not as exciting as it would be in person. And, you know, I understand how a student can lose motivation. So Dr. Harrison, you know, anything you can do and anything I can do to support you in a return to, you know, bringing our students back to school, you know, I've got your back on that. I'd, you know, like to do whatever I can to make that happen. And just as board members, you know, or as a board member, I feel like I'm presiding over the lost year. You know, that year where the students weren't in school, they were at home, and it was a big experiment. We were doing our best, but what will be the long-term effects of the lost year? I worry about that. I don't know if there's any precedent in history of students being, you know, outside of school for that long. And also the fact that we're driving them online faster than, you know, social media was already doing that. And here we are, we're putting them on the computer even more. I worry about all those things. I'd really love to be back in school full time as soon as we can. Second thing I'd like to mention, completely different topic, very early in budget season here, and also very early in the diversity and inclusion initiative. I'd like us to take a look at open choice. Anybody familiar with that program? I'm sure, Dr. Harrison, I'm sure you're familiar with it. Open choice, I think it was started to be able to have towns or districts that have excess capacity from a physical plant standpoint, accept students from neighboring towns that were dealing with capacity issues. For us, for example, like Danbury, they're bursting at the seams. We're not. There's reimbursement from the state, and from what I read, every year there's an average of $2 million that the state allocates for this program that doesn't get used. And we could accept students in grades where we have capacity. You know how we have those small cohorts that work through our system, that we take a look at budget season every year, and we say, well, I know the cohort is very small, but next year there's a big one. Maybe we could help fill those gaps. Maybe we could retain staff that we otherwise might have to either reassign or part company with. Maybe this is a solution for that. So I'd really like us to take a hard look at open choice, just from a school district standpoint, from central office standpoint, but also Heather, if Not sure if you've taken a look at that, but I think it might help you over on the diversity program. That's it.
Thank you, Mike. Other board member comment, Heather?
A couple of things. Mike, I have been asking for years for it to be a program, so that is on the table for sure.
It's your idea then. That's fine.
I can specifically recall asking McMorrin about that at least 4 times. One thing I want to say really quick, I appreciate everybody, the struggle that we have all had, and I hear parents expressing their frustration, and I also want the kids back in school, especially because, but I want everyone to remember why this is happening, and nobody wanted to have our kids learning online. Thank God that we can have classes online, or we likely wouldn't be having classes at all. And I know this hasn't happened in 100 years, but this hasn't happened in 100 years. We have not been in a situation like this. And I don't know how closely you pay attention to the news, but I have a lot of friends in Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, if you're in a car accident, they can't resuscitate you on the scene, you don't go to the hospital right now. The hospitals are running out of oxygen. So it is dire circumstances. And we're lucky right now that we do have some room in our local hospitals. So I also think that we should, if we can, get people back in, get our students back into school, keeping in mind that at any moment we might have to pull them out again. That's so I just want to remind everyone that nobody is more frustrated with this situation than me. I am beyond sick of being in my house, but it's not by choice, and it's not over, unfortunately.
Thank you, Heather. Other board member comment? Okay, hearing none, we move on to Assistant Superintendent's report. Dr. Pearson-Ugal.
Thank you. I think I will hold any comments in a report for the discussion of the math resource recommendation.
Okay. Thank you. Then we'll move on to building administrative reports, and we can start with RES. Natalie?
Good evening, everyone. And I echo Chris Parkin's comment. Happy New Year to everyone. I think we can all agree that when we see this little light at the end of the tunnel, as they keep calling it, it really gives us hope. So we just got to keep hunkering down together, and we are going to get through this. I hope everyone has remained healthy and will continue to remain healthy. One of the big things that we are really reminding our families of is being really open, honest, and transparent. We know families spent time together over the holidays, and just really being honest about that. Did you travel? Making sure that we're being open and honest with the administration and with our teachers, so that, just like Heather was saying, we can do what's right. And when we do come back healthy and stay healthy, and really keeping these protocols in mind. So we thank our families for doing that, continuing to do that, and really making that right decision to give us a ring or call us if you want to chat about your circumstances. So you'll notice on our board report, and I will have next week, Chris Parkin has requested of Phyllis and me and our teams information on our enrollment. As many of you are aware, we have had people coming and going for the past 9 months, some for choices to homeschool, some for choices for a private school, some for choices of other districts, some moving out of state, some moving across the state. We've also had a good number of families moving in from out of state, whether there has been a relocation due to job or other circumstances. So we will have that information for you and your team, a more thorough information next week. But I can tell you, you'll see a change in one number since our last board meeting in our enrollment. But really what's happened is we've had 3 or 4 move out and 3 or 4 come in. So there has really, we have seen much more of a transient population this year than we have any other year in my tenure at Reading Elementary. In this month's board report, you will see we did highlight, and thank you for mentioning earlier, someone, I think Ms. Baker mentioned the gifted program, or AKA our advanced learning opportunities. So within this month's board report, I hope you have a chance to take a look at literacy, math, STEM, our advanced learning opportunities, the things that are happening in the building. I think so much we're getting hung up on my child's falling behind, or this isn't the same. We know it's not the same, but we are making sure to hold on to the programs that we're so lucky to have at Reading Elementary, and even doing these remotely, whether it's remote or in hybrid or an all-in, really maintaining the wonderful things that we have in place at Reading Elementary School. So I hope you get a chance to take a look at that and some of the projects, activities, and experiences that the children have had throughout this time. I look forward to our conversation about budget together. This will be my 4th year doing it with you. And, I always appreciate us being able to be open and honest with you about the needs that we have. And I think this year is going to look a lot different. When I'm thinking of our grade levels for next year, I am really thinking of keeping our class sizes small so we really can hone in and work with these children in smaller settings to really meet them where they're at, the best we can do. So I look forward to our ongoing conversation. And again, to everyone, here's to a prosperous and healthy and happy new year. We're going to get through this year together, and it's surely going to be better than the one we just left. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Natalie. And a comment just on the enrollment request so that other folks are aware of what I was kind of getting at, is just an understanding of when folks have withdrawn, whether they've withdrawn because they've moved out or they've withdrawn to homeschool, because I think it's important as we look at next year's budget and potential enrollment swings to understand what sort of latent population might exist, who might be withdrawn for COVID reasons only, but might come back once the situation settles. So that's going to be helpful from both buildings. A question with respect to the report, and before we get into the fiscal 22 issues coming up on Thursday, are there any areas of concern from the RES side that would require any kind of additional resources or board support as we go to the second half of the current academic year?
I understand right now that we have, we've been in a little hiatus right now, but I do understand that we have some interviews for some substitutes coming into the building. So we're looking forward to moving forward with that, because I do anticipate that it could potentially be an issue if we have people who have either been in close contact or we hope this doesn't happen, but who do fall ill, that we have the support necessary. So I look forward to working with Joe Modio as well as Vicki Cram to hopefully get some bodies to help support as substitute teachers.
Can you speak to the qualifications for folks who might be listening and might be available to help?
My understanding, and Dr. Harrison, please, or Stephanie, please jump in if I'm not correct about this. My understanding, undergrad, is that an undergrad for substitute teaching, undergrad degree?
I actually don't think that that's required. I believe.
There you go.
I think less schooling is required, but I will find out. I'll verify that with Vicki Cram and get back to you.
And so if folks listening are interested and available to help as substitutes, should they call central office and talk to Vicki, or should they call Joe? What's the best place for people to go?
Central office and to the attention of Vicki Cram.
That is true, Stephanie. You are right, because we do have students who are currently in college. You are absolutely right. We do have students who are currently in college who on their breaks over, like last year, for example, during their breaks, they would come in and do the substituting. So yeah, we'll definitely get more specific information for you on that. But
yes,
I think
I believe it is a high school diploma only.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thanks. And as we move into a hybrid posture starting next week, it'll probably be helpful for both buildings in their weekly communication to kind of provide some context for families who might have somebody at home who could help as a sub. The more, the merrier. That's what it feels like. Any other questions for Natalie with respect to the RES report? All right. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you.
Moving on to John Reed. Dr. Amori.
Oh, hello, everyone. I want to echo everyone's Happy New Year comments. If there were ever a year when we wanted to transition to a new one, it's definitely this one. Even though, of course, good things happened in the previous year, it's just hard to remember them. I'm just interested to share that Darlene and I just spoke today with regard to enrollment about a student that she just learned the parent will be withdrawing the student for homeschooling. And the reason is that the student is just doing so poorly in the distance learning model. It's this drilling down, this ability to get this detailed information in a small enough school that is very helpful. And we'll do our best to share that information with the board. Everything is different. We don't really know why students have come to us. Maybe I think, for example, I think some of our newer students came initially when we were still open and the school they were attending was closed, so, and then when they got here, we closed. I mean, it's the times in which we're operating that make these things very, very different. And I think our previous models and ways of figuring and budgeting have to be examined. And so we will, of course, get you as much information as we can to help the board make those decisions. As you can see from our report, we didn't have too much change. I know we had a couple leave and a couple added, so we're feeling, pretty stable in that regard, but there are individual stories there. And when we see trends, we'll be sure to share them with you. I would like to highlight, there's our snowman there. I do want to just have a really a proud shout out for our custodial staff headed by Stephen Seifert, our new head custodian. We are seeing detailed work in the building that, and I have a 1-year perspective. It's just stunning when you walk in. So one day we saw them, for example, like cleaning off the, what do you call them? The kick pads at the bottom, of this walls. I forget the word, like a molding, the bottom molding. They removed them all and scrubbed them clean. I mean, that's a simple little thing, but what a difference it makes when you walk into a sparkling clean building. What a message it sends to our children, our community. Even though it's an older building, we care about it and we're really taking care of it. So this has been an opportunity. We miss our students very much, but not having them and the teachers in the building, our custodial staff has really kicked in, and John Reed is sparkling and spanking clean, and we can't wait to have them back to that wonderful environment. Frankly, we're really thinking about next week and welcome our students back. A sneak preview to this week's listserv. We are going to provide students with lockers. It'll be different than it's been in the past because we know they're coming in with coats. Those of them who wear coats, we know middle schoolers don't always do that, but those who come to school with coats, we will have a locker available to them for just for coats and just for their lunch boxes, which take up so much room in their backpacks. But what we're trying to avoid, of course, is, lockers in middle schools are the equivalent of the water cooler in the office, right? That's where the kids congregate and they socialize, and it's a wonderful chance usually between periods for them to do that, but we can't have them, of course, doing that at this time when we want them to socially distance. So we're going to be pretty strict about what the lockers are for. Darlene spent a lot of time last week assigning lockers with spaces in between. It'll be much easier in hybrid, but when we're all in, we're really going to have to be diligent about having these quick stops. We have a schedule in place, and we're going to work with the students and ask our families at home to support that. So again, we're thinking ahead. What's it going to be like when the students are back? How do we keep them safe? And that's one of the things I wanted to share. I also thought I'd share briefly with you. I try in these board reports to focus on what might you not know, like how does school run, like on a daily basis from an insider's perspective. This morning, Darlene and I met with our team leaders, which we meet with them on a regular basis, and their mission for this meeting was to prepare an answer to this question: what are your goals for yourself and your crew, for your team of teachers from now in June? Like, I wanted them to think positively. I wanted to think about what they can still accomplish in the roughly 6 months that remain to us, because otherwise those kinds of meetings can easily digress into a nuts and bolts. Well, how are we going to keep the students safe, and how are we going to make sure the hallways are safe? And these are all legitimate concerns, but Darlene and I want to take those burdens from them and help them to focus and be the leaders that we know them to be, and inspire their team of teachers, who in turn, of course, will do that for the students. It was a great meeting, and I think and I certainly left it feeling uplifted, hearing the wonderful goals and stories that they share with us for their individual teams and departments. So that was pretty cool. Lastly, I wanted to just share that we actually turned our snow day. Was it a snow day? Was it not a snow day? Our teachers, really had just such great ideas for our students. There were science experiments going on about how quickly snowballs melt. We had our great art day that Bonnie Spees put together along with Judy Collentine, and we had these fabulous workshops. The kids were thoroughly engaged. It's once again speaks to our staff and our ability to be a true middle school, project-based learning, keeping students engaged. And I really have to share how proud I am of the staff to continue to do those sorts of things with all the challenges that we have. So we look forward to continuing that when we come back to school next week in our hybrid model. And that's my report for this month. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. I'll ask you the same question I asked Natalie about any other resources or support that the board could provide for the current fiscal year at this point.
Yes, and I would echo her comments that that would be the only concern is substitutes. We already have somebody in place. We're looking to add another person because inevitably somebody may have to quarantine. It's that sort of thing, so we can keep our building functioning in that regard. I think if we could be proactive and get that support for subs, we'll be in pretty good shape.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions for Phyllis with respect to the John Reed report? All right. Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you.
We'll move on to discussion and possible action A, learning models and COVID-19 data. And so I would turn it over to Dr. Harrison to give us an update on his conversations with our health advisors and where we're going from here.
Good evening, everyone. And Chris, I'm going to share my screen if that is okay. Sorry, hang on one second. So I just want to start by just thanking the members of the public for their comments just related to the desire to get students back in the building. And I try to start every sort of presentation or email or whatever the response is by saying, I am desperately wanting our students to be back in the building. I would say that for all of our educators who are a part of this meeting and just related to our schools, we are in the business of teaching and learning. And we know that the best way to do that is to be meeting with students in person. And so it is very difficult for us when that's not the case. For me personally, where I'm still sort of in the early parts of my transition, it has been really difficult for me to really connect in the ways that I really love to as a superintendent with not having students in the building on a consistent basis. And so that is definitely a priority, a top priority. I just want to talk a little bit about the data and how we sort of use all of these indicators in order to make a decision. Let me go ahead and start by answering the question that I know is on a lot of people's minds, and both of our administrators have already alluded to it, and that is we are moving forward with the plan to come back on Monday in a hybrid and be in hybrid for next week with the plan to move back to full in-person learning after Martin Luther King weekend. So to be able to use next week as a transition and move to getting our students back in the building. Of course, we want to do that safely. And I want to just talk a little bit about the data and how this data is being interpreted. So this is our ER9 COVID-19 dashboard that we recently sort of revamped. We had something kind of a beta version of just giving some numbers just before we went to break. But I felt like this gives a much clearer picture of where we are. So you can get to this by going to the district homepage of the district site, and you'll see the COVID-19 dashboard. Click on those links and that will take you here. This information, the three charts here, cases per 100,000, test positivity rate, hospitalizations, those are updated on a daily basis. And then of course, putting in the quarantines and current isolations. Our nurse coordinator is doing that for us on a weekly basis. So this really does give real-time information. But I want to start this conversation by scrolling to the bottom and looking at the CDC, looking at the CDC Transmission Guidelines. So this question of, when we're trying to answer the question, how can we, what's the best learning model for us to be in school? The real question behind that is, how can we determine the likelihood of transmission of the virus within schools? So the obvious way is, let's look and see how many students or staff are getting sick as the result of being in school. But the CDC, prior to the start of the school year, gave us some sort of rough guidelines to be able to get a sense of what's the likelihood that we would be seeing transmission in schools. And so you see these indicators kind of here listed on the left-hand side. One of the primary indicators that we have been watching is the number of new cases per 100,000 people with over the course of a 14-day period. And that's that main number that you see at the top of our instructional modality indicators, this cases per 100,000. And so based on what the CDC shared initially was this kind of table of looking at the lowest risk of transmission to the highest risk. So the highest risk of transmission is looking at that number, that new cases per 100,000 being above 200. That's the highest level. And then you see higher risk of transmission between 50 and 200, moderate risk, and then on down the line. What the state did prior to the start of the school year to give guidance to school districts on instructional models is they took these CDC guidelines and took a little bit more of a conservative approach, which is what you see here. So essentially, based on the state recommendations, the sort of magic target number was around 25 cases or more per 100,000 population over a 14-day period. And so even though they issued that guidance over the summer, what we've seen is that when towns got to that number and exceeded that number, we still saw that there wasn't widespread transmission within schools, which then gave us a sense of there's nothing hard and fast about that number. In fact, even with the CDC guidelines, one of the things that it talks about with these thresholds is that it's important not to use any of those indicators or even a combination of the indicators in isolation or hard cutoffs in decision making, but really as sort of guideposts in helping us to see this is when we should start considering less in-person learning or feel more comfortable shifting back to more in-person learning. So since the start of the school year, where we started with that pretty hard 25, that number is now a lot more flexible. And so the state, even in their guidance, has become a lot more, where they started the year with a much more conservative approach. They've sort of walked back that approach and said, you know, we're seeing school districts who are exceeding that number without there being widespread changes, which is sort of the foundation of how we're talking about sort of where we are with these cases with this primary indicator being at 38 in Reading, as we see here, and this 35 is looking at both towns together, that we can still talk about coming back into school safely because of the shifting away from being more conservative in the way that we started the school year, and then also learning from the successes that we see in neighboring towns. In talking with the health directors, and we meet with them on a regular basis, we had a discussion today where we felt more comfortable with relaxing our tolerance for that threshold case count being a little bit higher and feeling comfortable that we could safely bring students back in and staff back into the building without the concern for widespread transmission. And the reason why is because what we've seen since the start of the school year, not just in our district, but in districts around us, is that our mitigation strategies that we've had in place have been working successfully. So really looking at the masks, social distancing, our hand hygiene processes, cleaning and disinfection, and then really getting into contact tracing in collaboration with the local health department. That in collaboration with the cohorting, those are strategies that are helping to mitigate the spread within schools. But there are other numbers that we are really paying very close attention to. Heather alluded to this at the start of the meeting, talking about hospitalizations, and we see that that's a huge concern in other parts of the country. So we are monitoring what hospitalizations look like in our county to make sure that we are not contributing to the sort of overall burden across the county and across the state with the decisions that we're making regarding community spread. We're also looking at that test positivity rate, and that number, if you kind of look back down at these secondary indicators, that positivity rate, we're really looking at the direction of change. So we want to see that positivity rate moving in consistently downward direction. In our conversation today with our local health directors, one of the things that we talked about was that after each of the holidays, so from Halloween to Thanksgiving, and now the Christmas and New Year's, that we've seen these spikes happen following the holidays. And so we are trying to be really conscious of the level of disease in the community, the level of community spread, in lowering the risk for our students, which is why there was a proactive decision to anticipate that spread and minimize the exposure of our students. So one of the things that we are also trying to keep in mind is that once we bring our students back in, we can anticipate that there'll be opportunities and the need for us to have to put students out and staff out in quarantine if there's exposure. And we know that with each of those exposures, it makes it very difficult from a learning perspective, the in and out, but we do feel like it's important to the greatest extent possible to get our students safely back in the building. So I say share this for two reasons, because I want to, for the sake of being very transparent, I want to make sure that our community knows that this dashboard is here and it is updated on a regular basis. So our families could take a look at where we are as a district, that we are updating the current quarantines and isolations. Of course, that data is pre-break, and we're still collecting that information from our families. And as Natalie mentioned, it is hugely important for our families to make sure that they're notifying the school if they have positive cases or if their students and children are currently in quarantine, because that helps us with, from a planning standpoint, to make sure that staffing is available. I know prior to us going out for the winter break, Vicki and HR has been working hard to increase our substitute pool. And so we do have a number of new substitutes available that will help us in the event that staffing becomes an issue because of future quarantines. So we're hoping that all of those pieces together in combination with our mitigation strategies will help us to keep our schools open and keep students learning in person. The last piece that I just want to mention is that there are so many things that we've learned about this virus, even just since the start of the school year. And with a quick Google search, it's easy to find another 10 articles at least within the last hour that were just published of new things that we're learning and continue to learn just in relationship to this. And so as we are learning more information and looking at what's working and what's not working, we are making adjustments to our approach and to our plan. And my goal is to make sure that our community is updated on how we're interpreting this information, and most of all, helping to really communicate the sense that we are focused on getting our students back into school, and we want to do that in the safest manner possible. One big light at the end of the tunnel that I think we've all recognized is that vaccinations are underway. As a state, we are currently in stage 1A, which is healthcare workers and I think people in residential facilities, and they are priorities right now. All of our educators, and so that's everyone from principals to custodians to teachers to paraprofessionals to bus drivers, they are all in, we are all in group 1B, and we are anticipating that, that we'll move forward with shifting into 1B sometime late January into February. So there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. And one of the things that we'll continue to, well, not continue, but we'll begin sort of reporting on with this dashboard is where we are as a staff within the process of vaccination, because I think that that will be important. Community numbers, and as you see is listed here as some of the additional considerations. And so that's where we are. I wish that there was an easy way to say that that you know, as soon as we get to this number, then here's the next change, or if we drop back down to this number, here's the next change. But I did want to give a picture of these are all of the pieces that we're considering, and we are really doing our best to stay current with the science and thinking about how to not just keep our students and staff safe, but also be responsible in thinking about the impact on the community.
Thank you, Rydell. Are there any questions with regard to all that information? Mike?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Harrison, for the dashboard. That's going to be really helpful for us to track. Actually, I've had it up in my an open window on my computer. I've been hitting the refresh button, like, you know, like, let me see these numbers go down, you know. So thank you. I'm wondering, because both of our building principals mentioned substitutes. How close are we? Are you comfortable sharing, or do you have the numbers? How close are we on substitutes to having either not enough or just enough? What's your opinion there?
Yeah, so you know, here's a really vague answer to that question, Mike. So we have more than we had a month ago. So how many more? I actually was just reaching out to Vicki to see if she could give me a number, because when we were talking about additional substitutes, we were thinking about increasing that pool across all 3 districts so that there's some opportunity to share between the 3 if necessary. The other part is that, you know, our schools, like many schools around us, it is likely that we could be in a position where even with having additional substitutes, it still becomes a challenge. I've shared this with all of our principals, and I've tried to reiterate it enough times that they know that I'm not just, you know, sort of blowing smoke, but I am more than happy to cover a class as a substitute if I need to. And I think that, you know, there are those of us in central office. I mean, it is really, we are willing to be all hands on deck. At the end of the day, we also want to remind ourselves that we are in the business of teaching and learning. So it is more than just having a body in the room, but we really want to have people there who could keep the learning going forward. There have been a number of parents in Reading who have reached out to me, and which I absolutely appreciate. And I've forwarded those emails directly to Vicki saying, look, we want to get our kids back in school. And if it's helpful, I'm willing to be a sub as well. And so thanks to parents who have that flexibility, and we welcome more folks in our community if they are willing to make that commitment as well. And as Stephanie mentioned earlier, the best thing to do would be to contact central office, and we'll take you through the process.
A quick follow-up. Is there any significance to the color coding in additional considerations down there on the lower right where substitute teachers were? I see reds and oranges down there. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes. So so there's no sort of hard number that that shifts the colors on those. but we tried to use colors there just to indicate sort of where the how concerned we are about that, right?
Okay.
So right now I'm pretty concerned about the ICU beds, the occupation of ICU beds across our area. That substitute teacher availability would have been read prior to the concerns or prior to the securing of new substitutes across all 3 districts. So just really trying to kind of give a sense of where we are in those areas instead of having sort of hard specific numbers behind it.
Great, thanks.
Any other board members have questions or comments on the topic?
Chris, I'm gonna say, this is Colleen. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Leibowitz. He is our local director of health in Reading. And I think he might be a person that our community is less familiar with. But I think that one of the reasons why I want the kids back in school too, but one of the reasons why I trust the decision making is because I have confidence in who's advising us. And so I just want to alert the community that if you're feeling like these are not data-driven decisions and science-based decisions, even if you don't agree with the science or the data, those are factors driving the decisions. And so there is a YouTube video with Dr. Leibowitz. I think he was talking with our Dr. Harrison and our board chairs. And I think that it just gives you a snapshot of our health official who's helping us. And it gave me a lot of confidence knowing that he's there. He is definitely science-based, definitely data driven. I think it might help ease some of the concerns going on. I have a huge extended family here locally. And so that allows me to have family members in many different schools, and every family is struggling. So even in school districts where the school is open, I have like a 9-year-old nephew who really needs in-person learning, like for real. But he was out 3 of the weeks that we were doing full distance. He was home, even though his school was open, because he had come in close contact with a kid who tested positive. So that experience also is super challenging. So I know it's an anecdotal story, but it's just like a cautionary tale that opening doesn't necessarily, it's not going to feel normal. It's not going to feel easy or like it used to feel. I think that we just have to pull together and support the decisions that are being made in the best interest of the health of our community. I also think, just one last thing, I also think I read that advice from the state that said that we should not, I can't even remember the exact word, but like preemptively close school. But the impression I got from reading that advice was that on November 1st, they didn't want us arbitrarily setting a date to close school. Like, we're just going to close the day before Thanksgiving and we won't open again before January. It is my strong impression that is not what we did. We were following the data. We saw a trend in the data. And so before it became a bigger problem, we chose to shift our learning models. To me, that is not ignoring the guidance of the state. It's actually following the guidance of the state. There are times in this board position, I wish we could follow the guidance from the state less. But I think we go to great lengths to follow that guidance. And so I don't know. I think I think we have a lot of communicating to do. And I think I hear the families who are struggling, and I just want to round out the story, I guess. I want to balance the story.
Thank you, Colleen. Any other questions or comments on the COVID and learning models topic? Okay. Thank you again, Dr. Harrison. That was very helpful context for everybody. Moving on to item 7B, 2021-2022 budget process. I just wanted to take a few minutes tonight to discuss the process by which we will be discussing the budget starting on Thursday with the formal presentation of the budget for a number of reasons. First of which, obviously, we're doing this entirely remotely this budget season, which is going to be a new experience. Secondly, we're going to be working with two new senior administrators in Dr. Harrison and Mr. Zachary. Third, we're going to be using a new finance program, eFinance Plus. So everything is going to look different as we try to get through a conversation that is become sort of routinized in how we go about it. We're going to see a lot of different things. And so I wanted to give Clarence and Rydell the opportunity to say a few words tonight to give us a sense of what to expect in the budget presentation and what to expect in how we can best prepare ourselves to work through the questions we're going to have to address in the next couple of months.
Thanks, Chris. I'll say a couple of words and then give Clarence an opportunity. One thing that we're going to do differently this year is that the overall percent of increase will be determined by the spread of COVID in the community. So if you can get that number to go down, then the percentage of increase with the budget will follow. So that's just a little incentive to make sure that you are, I'm just kidding, but an incentive to make sure that you're following all of those mitigation strategies, even when you're not in school. So a couple of things that you'll see, and thanks, Chris, for providing the context. There are a lot of changes with personnel, with the process, with the programs, or the financial program, that is. And so what you'll see on Thursday, we'll start with the narrative, really spend some time talking about what are the drivers for the budget, and then I'll talk about how that aligns to our enduring goals and aspirations. I think in one of our previous conversations, one of our board members mentioned that they are definitely a visual learner. And so seeing lots of charts or seeing just lots of numbers is not always the best way to capture the bigger picture. And so we're going to make sure that we have some really good graphics in there. And kudos to Clarence for really working his connections to help us put together a budget that is not just going to capture what our needs are from a resource standpoint, but really being able to tie them back to sort of the overall picture and do that in a way that is visually appealing and easy to understand, not just for board members who have been doing this for a long time, but also just for members of the community, for them to get a real clear picture of where we're headed. And with that, Clarence, I'll give it over to you to talk about some of the additional details that we mentioned.
Good evening, everyone. Like Rydell mentioned, and Chrisman, we've got some substantial changes coming. Our new HR finance platform went live on January 1st. So we're into technically day 2 of being in the office using it. Chris originally asked to have the budget presentation tonight, and I said that's a little too close to my comfort level for new system going online. We're still working on a few kinks there, but what you should be able to expect, as Rydell mentioned, is a much more user-friendly budget presentation. There will be a lot more summary information. For those who like the detail and the line item detail, we'll provide that also further down the road. But right now, we want to give you a broad overview of sort of directionally where we're going or what the building leaders and the superintendent and the assistant superintendent have asked for. And that will give you an overall dollar amount that we're looking for, and also percentage increase, and sort of have a narrative of how we got there. Then the challenge for you all is to sort of figure out what you want to support in that, and maybe you want to add on to it, you may want to take away, but we view our roles to give you the data in a user-friendly manner that not only you as board members, but the community can sort of digest. And then if you have questions, we'll be looking to respond to your questions. So We're still pulling that together. Like I said, we're still working out the kinks of eFinance Plus, but we think we will be ready to go by Thursday evening. So our goal is we'll probably get it to you shortly before the meeting. So don't be expecting anything shortly before the meeting. And the binders you've gotten in the past, you will not be getting on Thursday. So we'll give you sort of a appetizer first, and then we'll bring the main course on a little later. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any questions from board members about expectations or anything that they are particularly keen on making sure they see or don't see in the process?
Chris, this is Colleen.
Go ahead.
Just in a year with so many changes baked into it, can you share with the group why it is we changed HR finance platforms this year? Do you recall?
I can do that, Chris.
Okay.
We were previously using Phoenix. Phoenix has been sending out notice for the last 5 years. They were sunsetting it. We apparently took our sweet time about changing over. It was supposed to occur last July, but with COVID going on, we pushed it off till January. So if you didn't make the change, you were going to be without a platform because there's no longer any technical support. It's been, I first used Phoenix back in 2012, and at least since 2014 or 15, they've been giving notice it's going to be sunset. And we apparently were sort of late to the party about finding another program, and this is what's happening now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments about budget process? Or anything you'd like to make sure you see? All right. Well, thank you, Clarence.
There is one other thing.
Oh, Colleen.
Reading is a wonderful place to live, but it can get pretty tough during budget time. And as much as it might be possible to still have a printout, I know you're saying all the data will be available, but I'm also, and I'm so excited, and I really look forward to the new format with the narrative to put things in perspective. I think that is wonderful. But I think there are members of our community who will be looking for something they can compare to last year. And so if there is a way to have the data available, the proposed data for next year available so that it can be compared easily to what happened this year, even if it's in a different format, I think there are members of our community that will really look forward to seeing that.
So Colleen, I'll jump in and answer that. So I think that we absolutely will be able to see that historical perspective in this sort of new presentation, but the data that you're used to seeing in that chart form, I mean that's still available, and I think that it would be very easy. Sort of once we get to Thursday, if we were to say then, this is really great, but it would still be helpful just to see it in the other format. I don't think that would be difficult to share electronically.
If I can make just a clarifying point, the specific format you've seen historically, you will not be able to see because that's a Phoenix output. We're no longer in Phoenix, so that the visual format of the previous is gone because we've now switched over to eFinance Plus, which has a different format. The same information will be presented, but just it's laid out different. Like one is landscape, one is portrait, and it's just a lot of different sort of nuances. But the new format we're providing, it will generally show year over year change, dollar and percentage wise. So it'll show you we're asking for this much for this account. That's an X dollar increase over last year and an X percentage increase. So that you won't have to be going back and forth between two different presentations trying to figure out, track the changes. It'll be done right there for you, if that addresses your concern.
Okay, thank you.
I think the bottom line is that the budget detail is going to be available no matter what. It's just going to look different.
Correct.
And I think as we get comfortable in the eFinance Plus world, we'll get comfortable knowing what reports are available and what we can ask for as far as comparisons and things like that.
Correct. So the data will be there, just question how it's presented.
I, for one, am really looking forward to seeing not just numbers, but the reasons behind the numbers. So Appreciate that. And I was never a fan of that big binder.
You don't say.
So I just want to point out one other thing, Mike, to your point about open choice. So you won't see anything in there about open choice, but I will tell you this: I have been advocating for Reading to have an open choice option in partnership with Danbury Public Schools. I think since the second day that I started on the job, and it is a conversation that that has to be had in Hartford, and we've sort of put that in the ear of our local legislators on behalf of Reading, but then also just with my affiliation with our Superintendent Association for this state. It's something that we're also advocating for because we know the positive impact that will have on all students from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint. And so I'm happy to hear that it's something that is, I'm not surprised, but I'm happy to hear it, that it's something that is welcomed and something that we'd all be excited about. And so I think that in addition to that as an option, there's some other things that I'm exploring for as some ways to create some partnerships as well. I know that's not technically budget related, but I did want to just mention that in response.
Can I say something to follow up on that? Is I had spoken to Rahab Ali Brennan, who represents part of Reading and also part of Danbury, just casually, and he was already looking into it, and then COVID happened, and so it has to happen in the state budget in June. They would be allocating funding for that, so we wouldn't be able to put it. It wouldn't be reflected in our budget now. But assuming that that everything is back to normal in the fall, I assume that it would be a possibility.
Rydell, just so you know, there is a budget implication here. Not that children are widgets, but if you look at from a math or financial perspective, we now basically have a trade imbalance with Danbury, and that we pay for students to go to magnet school in Danbury. So there's a cash outflow. If you had an open choice, you could reverse that, at least neutralize that cash outflow of students coming in. So not that, let's say, students are widgets or anything like that, but there is a financial implication that there is a quote unquote trade imbalance between the two districts.
Yep.
Mike? I was just going to say thank you for tying that back together. I'll bet Danbury would be very happy to hear from you when, if and when we can get this working.
Well, I can tell you from my previous experience in other districts, Danbury, like a lot of urban districts or somewhat small urban districts, are having issues with increasing enrollment and not having enough physical space for the students. So they've gone to portable classrooms. So if anything to relieve that pressure, I'm sure would be appreciated.
Yep.
I think they were already talking to Monroe maybe, and would have been really, I think, happier to work with Reading. That would be my guess.
Any other questions about budget process from anybody? Right. Just to kind of put a bow on it, we'll look forward on Thursday to the formal budget presentation and sort of whatever initial questions and feedback the board has at that point. Then we are scheduled to convene again on Thursday, the 14th, for our first sort of roll up the sleeves conversation about the budget following the presentation, and then have 2 meetings scheduled in February to try to land the budget. And if not, as has been the case in the past couple of years, we'd roll into the first week in March as far as the timeline is concerned. Also for board members with respect to process, after the meeting on Thursday, I will circulate to you all a Google form into which you can plug in questions related to the budget, the presentation, and topics like that, to go away from the prior process of lots of emails being filtered through the chair and back to the administration to answer questions. We're trying to centralize and create increased efficiency to get everybody better answers more efficiently and get us where we need to go as quickly and effortlessly as possible. So we will look ahead to that on Thursday evening. Moving on to topic 7C, K-5 math textbook recommendation. And before I turn it over to John Riley, the chair of the curriculum committee, and Stephanie Pearson-Ugal, our assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, I would just point out that pursuant to Connecticut General Statute 10-229, whenever you're making a change in a textbook, you need to provide at least 7 days notice before providing a vote to approve such a change in textbook. And so tonight, we look forward to hearing the recommendation of the curriculum committee and the administration with respect to a K-5 math platform, textbook, learning platform that we can transition to going forward next year. And then I would anticipate scheduling a vote to approve that during next Thursday's meeting, January 14th. So with that, John. John, you're muted. Stephanie, do you want to give us an update on the textbooks?
Yes, I would be happy to. So I'm pleased to share that this evening's meeting of the Reading Board of Education Curriculum Committee included the third of our conversations regarding math textbook resource review and recommendation. And just as a way of background, the current resource that is being used in Easton and Reading Elementary Schools, Math in Focus, is nearing the end of a 6-year subscription. So the resource will no longer be available to us in this current edition. So we began the review of other resources last year. And so our math specialists, along with teacher representatives, have engaged in countless hours of review, moving from roughly a dozen resources that we asked to be sent to our districts to dig in, turn pages, review, down to 6. And those publishers, the sales representatives, gave presentations to a committee that included math specialists, teacher representatives, building and district administration. And finally, from 6 to 3. And at 3, there was another question and answer session with publishers, sales representatives, and finally to our single recommendation. And I see that John's mic appears to be back in action. So perhaps as chairs the committee, he would like to end this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate. Sorry about my technical difficulties right there. But no, I know that the committee has worked hard, as Stephanie mentioned, narrowing it down from multiple vendors down to a select few, and that we really relied heavily on their input, and they seemed very on board with this particular vendor. They really scrutinized the process quite a bit, or scrutinized the vendors quite a bit to make sure that they were able to get where they need to be moving forward. And it definitely seems like the right direction for us. And I know that there are conversations happening too, just to make sure that when we make this choice, that it's one that's makes sense both for the short term and the long term, is to have the flexibility to make a change, in future years, and not necessarily be locked into a long-term commitment, but also have something that's a resource for us moving forward.
A key difference in the resource that's being recommended is that it is more of a platform that includes a great deal of tech integration and built-in diagnostic assessments and also intervention tools, as opposed to a more traditional hardcover textbook with supplemental workbooks as resources. The subscription essentially buys us into a platform that also includes paper consumables for students, but the paper consumables have some of the explanatory information that would be traditionally found in a textbook. But all of the paper resources are consumables, except for, of course, the teacher editions.
It strikes me from the conversations with Susan Stewart and Melissa Null, our math specialists, that this is a quantum leap forward with respect to the manner in which we have these curriculum components, and the alignment with the Common Core is much greater than it was in Math in Focus, and the ability for the specialists and for our teachers to give assessments and figure out where students are going to be a huge time saver as well for all of our faculty that can focus on other things besides trying to fit square pegs into round holes.
Right. Some of you might remember the time of the transition to Math in Focus. This was our first resource that was aligned with Common Core standards. Connecticut adopted the Common Core standards in 2010, and then there was a period of time when our core resource was aligned with the previous Connecticut state standards and not the new standards. And our math specialist really worked very hard to pull together homegrown resources as a bridge until we had a core resource. So while Math in Focus represented the best option for us at that time, we knew all along that it was not perfectly aligned with the Common Core standards. It was, however, aligned with our beliefs about how students build conceptual understanding. And since that is so critical, we decided on Math in Focus. 6 years later, we're in such a different place. So really the fact that it was aligned, any resource was aligned with standards, was simply a given. And all of the resources we reviewed were aligned with standard. It really had more to do with the level of articulation and communication. So the top three contenders, I would say, all had a much more student-centered approach. So not only were lessons aligned with standards, but students were made more aware of their own learning. So for instance, a lesson or a unit might begin with an I can statement, and that really helps students to own the understanding, again, connected to standards. So as opposed to remembering an activity or a task that the teacher gives them, they hopefully will build understanding of the concept that's being taught.
And if anybody on the board or in the community is interested in learning more about the different products or the process that the team went through, the meeting of the curriculum committee from December is recorded and posted on the ER9 website somewhere, I'm sure. And you can listen in great detail as to how the team came to the recommendation that they did. So it being the curriculum committee's recommendation that we move forward with this particular vendor, did we name them specifically, John or Stephanie? I forget.
We have not yet in this meeting.
So I think we need to give notice as to exactly who the vendor is, and that is Envision Mathematics, and it's the proposal of the board adopt Envision Mathematics, ENVISION, as the core curriculum resource for K-5 to be effective in July of 2021.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and so the board will take up that question after the 1 week notice period on January 14th. Are there any questions from anybody with respect to the math curriculum textbook or process? All right.
Thank you. Thank you for going through that work, and it's very important. Thanks to the committee.
Yep. Thank you, John, Stephanie, Melissa, Susan, their peers in Easton, for all the hard work. Moving on to item 8, district administrative reports. We can start with Jen and special services, please.
Well, first I'd like to wish everybody a happy new year and welcome back. I'm actually going to be very brief because there really isn't a lot of change in our numbers. So really this is the time of year where we really start to think about extended school year, and we really start to talk about our planning and our recommendation for next year. So we're actually starting that process a little bit earlier. The teachers would be giving us their preliminary thoughts so that we could start looking at what are our classes and how it will shape up for next year. So we actually start that process now. We call it articulation meeting in terms of, what our students need to make sure that we have all of the right resources in place. So we actually start that process in right before, I would say, the Martin Luther King weekend, just to make sure that we have all the supports we need moving into the next school year. So in terms of students that have entered and exited, I think I mentioned at a previous meeting, we really are trying to track, how many kids move into Reading with an IEP and where. So we've actually been working very closely with our central office to determine, where are new students coming from? Are they coming from in-state? Are they coming from out of state? And so looking at what their program needs are, because that really could be a big budget driver moving forward. Are they transient population? Are they staying here? We also keep a close eye on our withdrawal numbers. Withdrawal because they're homeschooling their student, withdrawal because they moved to a private school. So again, we're trying to factor all of that into our decision-making for what programs and supports we need for the upcoming year. Do you have any questions for me?
Any questions from the board or Jen this month?
Because I share a lot of the concerns voiced tonight about our students who might be struggling to learn from home. And, I imagine that it's most challenging for, the most vulnerable students, of course. So I really want to know from special services what additional resources you think you're going to need in order to help these children when they transition back to you?
Well, I think the first thing that we've done is in partnership with the teachers and the administrators, we did prior to the Christmas break, we did return our basis and our basis students to the building for 2.5 hours a day. We returned that population because we felt that they really were at risk for significant regression. We've been working individually with parents to make sure that our mental health team can do check-ins with students. We also have established what we call thresholds. So there are students when we move into a hybrid model that if they receive so many services where they have what we call it the twin dip, which is time with non-disabled peers. So if they hit a threshold, those students are able to come in for 4 days as opposed to just 2 for their hybrid.
Good.
So really it's individualized depending on the needs of the student. So parents have reached out to us and we do our best to try to work with them collaboratively to make sure the supports are in place for them.
Jen, is there any buzz within the special ed community, the larger community outside of our district about what might happen after we return to normal? Are you expecting to be overrun with students that are entering the program or trying to do catch up? Is there any buzz about that going on right now?
Yes, there's always we always hear that there is a concern about regression. The parents have expressed they feel their child not making the adequate progress that they've seen in the past. So basically what I have advised staff to do is to do what we call probes because the IEP is data driven. So we are expected to report out on student progress. So in some cases, I have told the staff when the students come back, why don't you do a quick probe check? Did they advance? Did they regress? And if we find that the students have regressed, then by all means, we should be convening a PPT meeting to make sure that the goals and the program are appropriate for the students.
Do you think, are we going to see something in this upcoming budget that ties back to that? I'm sure you've already spoken to your portion of the budget. Are we going to see something like that?
I think there's always the possibility. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. As you know, special ed is all about making what we call meaningful progress. These students have an IEP with specific reason. They have an IEP because they've shown some weaknesses in certain areas. The question is how wide is that gap? And we always have to close that gap. And I think that in a COVID world, it makes the what am I looking for? To monitor that progress more challenging, because a lot of the assessments we use should be done in person. So it's a little hard to do the assessments remotely. So one of the creative ways that we've tried to do assessments that we will invite students in. The teachers will come into the building, the students will come in by appointment so we can assess their progress. The group that I think that we have to be most mindful of is the group that had chosen the temporary learning from home option for the entire school year, because we have not seen those students. So I would be curious to know that when they do return to us, and we do miss them dearly, how they're going to present in terms of their skill set. So we could see some challenges in that area, but we really won't know until we have all of the students back in the building, and that we can really determine what progress they've made.
Thank you.
It feels like if ever there were a budget year to be talking about a contingency for the unknowns and for claims for comp time or anything else, this is probably the year to have that conversation.
Yeah, I would add to that, and this is not necessarily specific to special education, but just in addressing the concern of will there be a gap in learning that could potentially have an impact on the number of new cases or identification of students with special needs. One of the things that we've been talking about is offering some summer programming for this coming summer, which and thinking of some creative ways to redirect funds from some of the savings that we're seeing during these periods where we've been out, and being able to be a little bit more creative about how we're able to offer some additional support, not related to ESY, but for as a general ed program to address some of the concerns that we might have academically from a proactive standpoint. So you'll be hearing more about that, not so much with the fiscal year 22 budget presentation, but just in upcoming conversations as we're looking at the ongoing assessment data throughout this school year.
Any other questions for Jen with respect to special services? Thank you, Jen. And Rydell has provided a nice transition to Clarence on the financials.
I think I need Rydell to free my video. Thank you, sir. John, Chris, I don't know if you want to, I can share my screen, or you want to just share, that's fine, that's perfect.
You tell me what document you got, I got them all here. So
no, that's go, that we'll do budget object summary first. This is, familiar with this report, this basically gives you an update of where we are. Looking at report, I'm gonna, bear with me 1 second, I'm going to reduce my screen so I can see it on my document. Budget object. All right. So basically, we're in a situation where the year is basically progressing as we expect. Some accounts are slightly over, some are slightly under. Don't worry too much about that. We'll look at the overall number where we at project toward the end of the year. So Chris, if you could slide down to the last page, page 3 of this report. And what you see there is basically in the second column from the right, it's basically telling us we've accounted for about 78% of our budget at this point. That includes the encumbrances that are listed to the right. So considering we're basically halfway through the year, we've basically accounted for almost 80% of our budget halfway through the year, which is typical. So there's nothing really of great concern that's going on. From my perspective, like I said, there are some accounts we haven't used a lot of the resources because of COVID related. We haven't been in the building. Others were over also due to COVID, but I feel very comfortable about our position at this point in the year. The main concern for someone in my position is to make sure we don't exceed our allocation come June 30th, and I don't have any concerns about that at this point. So I'll turn to open any questions anyone may have about the budget object summary before we move on to the next report.
Any questions on the current budget objects? Okay.
I will say this will probably be the last time you see this format because this is a Phoenix report. So you'll be seeing something similar, but it won't look like this. So this will you can
print it out and frame it.
Do whatever you like with it, but this will be the last one you see. All right, Chris, if you can go to the next one, please.
Transfers.
This is a transfers is pretty straightforward. We basically transferred $400. There's a need to purchase some PE equipment. They transferred from two different accounts. Obviously, we're not doing a lot of conferences and travel this time of year, and there was some availability of instructional supplies, so that netted out to a total of $400 for PE equipment. So it's pretty straightforward.
And then everyone's favorite health insurance summary.
This we need to talk about. Unfortunately for our colleagues and for the district, we had some significantly higher claims in November. Chris, I don't know if you can blow that up some so that others can see it. If you look on the right there, we were at 188,000 in October. We jumped to 357 in November. We just got our December numbers in last Friday, so we haven't processed those yet. But that significant jump, obviously caught my attention. We're going to have to track that going forward. If that maintains, we will have some decisions to make. I express a desire to Chris and some of the other board members to have, I'm going to bring in our healthcare consultants, hopefully at our joint board meeting, because I don't have to repeat the same thing to three different boards. So we can explain what's going on. We now have our Anthem projections. We have our Brown and Brown projections. So we need that information to decide what we're going to budget for next year's budget when it comes to healthcare. So I want them to come in and lay out sort of the framework for their rationale and Anthem's rationale. And then so we can have that data to make some cogent decisions about what we need to do. But given this, that claim in November, it's something that definitely has caught my attention. We need to pay attention for the next few months.
Without getting too deep into the weeds, is that a one-off claim or is that something that we think is a continuing condition?
We don't know. We're trying to figure out. That's why I got to drill down into the December numbers. So if I see a sort of a maintaining that level in December, it will cause me some concern. If I see it drop back down, maybe it was a one-off, but I don't know. And it's about getting people's details about people's conditions. I just got to drill down to that. But it's enough of a note for me to be concerned to make sure it's hopefully is a one-time blip versus a continuing trend.
Is there a stop loss hit built into that 357?
Yes. Okay. So that's one of the things we want to talk about when the Brown and Brown comes. So when Anthem does their projections for stop loss, they view us all three districts as one. So they assume a certain number of stop loss for all three, but we know that's not how we operate. So part of their projections is assuming that stop loss is spread out over three districts, but in reality, we could have 1, 2, or 3 in Reading alone, which changes, the needs. So that's one of the reasons why I want to have that sort of in-depth discussion in a week or two.
Well, are you seeing a similar pattern in one or both of the other districts?
No, we didn't see in November. We did not. It was a Reading on. Matter of fact, we originally thought it was an error, and we went back and looked at it and concluded it was an error. So it was definitely claims associated with Reading. We thought it was actually supposed to be in Easton. We thought someone just put it in the wrong sort of silo, but we confirmed those claims were associated with Reading School District.
Okay, so it's too early to tell what this is.
It is too early. My point here is to make you aware that we had this blip and we got to keep our eye on it.
Yeah.
Questions for Clarence on health insurance? Clarence, I think I cut you off. You're going to say something?
No, I'm just saying I was going to open up the questions. You took care of that for me.
So we will look ahead to a more in-depth conversation on the 26th about health insurance as among the three boards.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Clarence.
Chris, when we meet on the 26th, I know there is a point where we see this same set of data, but for central office. Is that the meeting where we'll see this data for central office?
We typically, historically, had not gotten this report for central office because the claims were relatively steady and relatively low. Okay. Scott had prepared this report for central office for a series of months when central office claims spiked so that we could be aware of that because it was an allocation that needed to be made at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. My understanding is that central office claims have reduced back to sort of a running and low average. But
that is correct.
If you're interested in seeing the report, I'm sure Clarence could circulate the report for central office so that we're up to date on that.
Yeah, I can circulate, but that's Chris is correct. It's sort of a running rate, you know, no areas of concern, but I can provide that if you like.
Okay.
Oh, it's more of a housekeeping kind of thing, just to keep an eye on it. If it's okay, it's, you know, I have a lot of trust in the process.
Any other questions on health insurance or otherwise for Clarence tonight? All right. If there are none, are there any other district administrative reports I've missed? Rydell, anything to add tonight? Okay. We'll move on to Board of Education committee reports. Any committees wish to report tonight? Mike?
Yeah, Facilities Committee. At the last meeting, we said we were going to bring more details about capital expenditure requirements. We're still looking to get together. I think Mike D'Agostino, Clarence, and I are working on schedule on that. But just to give in kind of list format a few things that we're looking at. We have like three categories. One is, you know, we have hard bids. Two is we're still investigating the need. And three, you know, we're looking at it for the future. And, you know, in the hard bid category, something that's needed in the short term, alarm systems, both buildings needing a different level of work. You know, RES, more of a modernization of the system, JRMS, more of a replacement of the system. Generator, let's stick with the hard bid category. The recreation area at RES, the paved area behind the building that's in terrible shape. It's also the paved area where all the students go when there's a fire drill, you know, whether it's, you know, during the winter or during the, you know, times when it's clear. So that needs to be replaced. We have a hard bid on that. And the elevator modernization at RES, there's an elevator there that we do need for some of our students, and it needs to be brought up to current standards. As far as a couple of items that we're still investigating, generator at RES, currently not functional, and there are so many options and so many complications with figuring out how we want to do that. We would like the building to be protected, you know, when the power goes out, especially during the winter. The water system at both properties, we're still doing investigatory work on that before we can come back and get, you know, hard numbers on exactly what needs to be done.
And I want to flow, Mike, on the water thing. I know I've spoken to our legislative team, and there's interest in coordinating with CTD possibly with respect to John Reed because of the proximity to Reading Road to try to get some funding for that too. So we should connect on that.
Like that. Yeah, that would be good. We're actually investigating a well that was previously drilled in the back that was abandoned because it was abandoned because it didn't have the flow that we were looking for. But what we're at, you know, back then we were looking for more quantity. Now we're looking for quality. So we're back into that. We want to get back into that well and see if it actually has quality water, and we can work around the, you know, the quantity issue. And then, you know, items that are in the future that, you know, probably aren't going to be a part of this, you know, what we bring back to the board would be window replacements and boiler replacement. I think those are going to be, you know, not for 2022 or 21, 22. I think it's going to be beyond that a little bit. So those are some of the items we're looking at. It's not a complete list, but just to let you know, there are things that we have older buildings. We're always going to have items we need to take a look at and keep up with.
Mike,
That's helpful, Mike. Thanks.
it's Colleen. So when you guys talk about hard bids and you listed 3 different areas, each one of those, is it 25,000? Each one of those exceeds a dollar value, or you do those as a package in a year?
No, each one of those happens to exceed.
Okay.
And just to give you an idea of, what does it take to get a hard bid? Sometimes it's very easy. You take a look at the recreation area, contractor comes out, and gives you a price based upon square foot, piece of cake. On the alarm, something like the alarm system, we needed, to actually, there were design considerations, investigating what we currently had, designing what we really should have, what does a school like RES or JMRS really need, and then deciding, where we're going to go with that, and then the hard bid comes last. So it's a little bit of a process sometimes. The elevator, pretty simple, one unit, not too many contractors to choose from. We know what needs to be done. We just need to get it done. And then, you have water system, which is super complicated. And I know we've been talking about that for a long time, but it's one thing at a time. No great answers. Me, I'm an optimist. I'm always going to look for the miracle, but we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Mike. Any other committee reports for this month? I would note that the policy committee continues to meet most Fridays at 9 a.m. if anybody's looking for a good time to start your weekend. In addition, on behalf of the John Reed Personnel Search Committee, just a note and a reminder that the survey is open for the community to please fill out with respect to commentary on what we're looking for in a new John Reed principal. So please check your email or check social media for a link to that survey and fill it out. The response rate has been relatively low so far, but now that the holidays are behind us, hopefully we can get additional responses. We'll have upcoming community forum and an upcoming special meeting of the board to discuss the community profile that Dr. Arardi puts together. If you were in tune for the superintendent search back in the spring, summer, it's a similar process. Community forum to listen to folks and what is important to them, followed by a presentation of what Dr. Arardi learns from talking to staff and faculty and administrators and the community and board members, so that we can be guided in our process to finding the new leader for John Reed in the next 2 months. Any other committee reports? If there are none, we'll move on to public comment. Any public comment, please raise your hand in the participants window or otherwise make yourself known. I see Julia Pemberton.
9 Walk Road, and town
Julia, you're breaking up.
Residences where there's been, can you hear me now?
A little better.
Okay, all right. The town currently provides water treatment systems for homes where there has been contamination for one reason or another. In the case of salt, which I know is we believe to be a primary factor in some of the contamination at John Reed, so similar to that, we've had some wells contaminated along 107 going up the hill. And so you might connect with Doug Hartline because he has so much, if you haven't already, and maybe you have, experience with this kind of thing. And we have.
We lost you again, Julia.
Wells, so there might be some potential there for you.
Thanks, Julie. We actually have a consultant a new consultant on the water systems that we really like. Last meeting, we had, a great report from him with a lot of options for us to choose from. And I'll make sure that he has spoken to Doug Hartline, before we make next decisions. He may or may not have. I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Any other public comments? Going once, going twice. Okay. Board member comment. Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Heather, second. Mike, any objection? Hearing none, we are adjourned at 9:17. Thank you, everybody, and we'll